This is a Niche Radio podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or log into www.nicheradio.co.za.
Welcome to SuperDads. Today we have a very interesting guest, and I believe you all are going to really enjoy what he has to say. He's very knowledgeable, very intelligent, and quite a man of influence in South Africa. If you guys want to get also more future shows, don't forget you can subscribe on our iTunes, YouTube, and other products and services are listed on the site. And our guest today is Fred, and he is from the Advertising Standards Authority of South Africa, and he is currently the head legal and regulatory affairs for the ASA since 2008. In his other background, he's admitted as an attorney of the High Court of South Africa in 2000, after he completed a Proc degree from the University of Natal and practiced as such in 2000 until December 2007. He graduated Diploma in Advanced Banking from the University of Natal in 2001 and graduated with MBA from Milpark Business School in 2016. So as you can see, he's quite the knowledgeable guy, and we're very fortunate for him to donate his time to us today. So Fred, thank you so much for being on the show from the ASA.
I appreciate the opportunity that you have provided us, James, to talk to your listeners worldwide in the US and all over the world.
Great pleasure. So because we are having some technical difficulties, and Fred, we have to have Fred called in from a telephone. So the speech process is going to be slower, so I'm not really going to interrupt him, and we might ask him to repeat certain parts if it doesn't come out so clearly through the phone. So Fred, first question, tell us, what is the ASA, and, what is their purpose and their function?
The Advertising Standards Authority of South Africa is an independent self-regulatory body. We were established in 1969 by the industry, the advertising industry in actual fact, to regulate advertising. In that one, we will consider complaints from the competitors and also complaints from the consumers. Our mandate was to come up with a code of advertising practice. The code encompasses the standards that advertisers use to produce their products and to prepare their campaigns, their advertising campaigns. So our role is just to ensure that when complaints come through, either by the competitor or by a consumer, we investigate and issue a ruling on the complaint.
So, Fred, you're, based on your CV, you're a really intelligent guy, and I had the pleasure of meeting you in person, and you have a very infectious smile and warmth about you. And there's no way that one would think that you have, a legal background or a legal regulator, because normally from experience in dealing with, different government or private industries, they come with this very hard, unapproachable, I have a stick up my behind kind of attitude, and I'm going to be this ego person of the world. But you, on the other hand, are very fair, you're very applicable, and sort of, tell us a bit more about you personally. What drove you to actually sign up to be part of the ASA team? And, how have, you been able to evolve through the process with the ASA in the years and your involvement in evolving it, and being able to stay as such a, warm, welcoming person?
I think for me, what actually happened is that since I graduated and become admitted as an attorney of the High Court, at all times my passion was to protect the public. And through courts, I realized that what is more upfront is money, is the monetary compensation than the passion, because now you have to look for clients who can actually pay your bills. But then as I grew up, I realized that the passion is not about money. The passion is about helping the ordinary citizens of South Africa. And I was approached by some of the colleagues within the legal fraternity that there's a position for somebody to head up the legal department within the ASA. And I think immediately I got that weight. I felt like this is my calling. I then applied for the position of the legal aid. I was invited for the interviews. And I think that I did well in the first interview. Then I was invited again for the second interview. I did well and I got appointed as the head of legal. And I think the legal background which I got helped me to understand the bulk of information that was within the ASA, because there was so much work that I had to hit the ground running. I had to read a lot. Most were the submissions by the ASA to government, various departments, minutes, interactions, conferences, and so forth. And on the other hand, I had to advise the board as well as the CEO of legal issues affecting the SA. But then, I think when I started to hit the ground running, when I started to sign on rulings, it's when I realized that this is the real job that I want in my life. Because now you are considering what concerns the public about advertising, because advertising was always viewed as this evil where people are tend to encourage to buy things that they don't need in their lives. And when I started to deal with rulings after our consultants or our investigators investigated the matters and they brought them to me for the making, it's when I realized the impact that I'm making on ordinary South Africans on a daily basis. And I think it's where I really found my purpose and my joy in life. So I think the regulatory background which I achieved over the years helped me to understand the code of advertising practice as well as other applicable legislation insofar as consumer protection was concerned. And I think with that, I was able to foster relationships with the Department of Trade and Industry when they came up with the Consumer Protection Act, and also the Electronic Communications Act with ICASA and other state bodies, because I realized that in order for the SA to proceed to play an important role, we had to be relevant within government and within the society at large. My personality, I think, is more of giving rather than taking. And I always appreciate the fact that I'm a kind of a person who agrees to be led. I don't see myself as this leader or a bulldog that can push everybody aside. I also have a sense that to be a great leader, you have to be led. And I think being a people's person, you have to be welcoming at all times. You have to be open-minded. You have to understand that every individual that comes your way brings some experience or brings something that you can learn in your lifetime, which might actually change your life forever.
No, I mean, I think we should actually have you giving lectures at the university so the students get some proper curriculum training. Because, I mean, with the history of the ASA, I mean, it's been an up and down road, especially over the last few years with the financial constraints and moving of CEOs and sort of we had a discussion before where it's this restructuring process, but you've been through this process of coming through the fire and out the ashes and helping rebuild the ASA into a more reliable and stronger brand or regulatory body every step going forward. And you've been able to demonstrate practicing persistence. And even though you did give warnings and advice to your CEOs, unfortunately, that is with life. We do sometimes give advice to our more seniors, but sometimes it's hard to be patient while the process takes its course. And you have been fortunate in helping control the reins of taking the ASA forward, because it was very close to you guys actually, filing for being bankrupt and no longer being around. And what's been really valuable is that normally, because with the ASA, most of your funding comes from industry, and what happens is from a public perception, typically when that occurs is that there's a fear of, oh, if I bring a case that even if it's really good or controversial, then, you're going to side with who's funding your back pocket. But, what's been demonstrated, a lot of your case precedents and your principles is that regardless of who's giving the funding, you have taken the strong stance of keeping objective and taking the stance of what is in the public's interest.
See, I think I can agree with you on that, because I've seen the ASA since 2008. But what I did when I joined the ASA is that I went back to when the ASA was formed. I went through the minutes of 1968, especially the formation of the ASA, the drafting of the code, the first draft. I went through all that up until we started to have a position for the president of the ASA, which is usually a former judge of the High Court. Then I understood where the ASA come from. Now, being through that process until 2013, after the promulgation of the Consumer Protection Act, it's when strategically you need to understand the changing landscape, the new era brought upon by the Consumer Protection Act. And as a legal person and as a strategist, you have to understand the effect of the new legislation. I mean, the legislation was groundbreaking for the consumer protection in the country. And I think the enthusiasm that came through from all professional levels within the country, the attorneys, the advocates, the advertising agencies, motor retail industry, and so forth, everybody was so happy, and some were confused about the implications of that legislation. And I think one had to do an assessment. What could be the negative effect on the ASA? One was that the membership, because for so many years there were no any other alternative to the ASA, because the ASA, as a self-regulatory body, has managed to assume the authoritative role within society, including government, that relied on the ASA. But then you have the Consumer Protection Act that comes with Section 82 that provides for establishment of sectoral ombud schemes, meaning that every industry now can form and establish their own regulatory body. Therefore, all industries that relied on the SA had to unbundle. In that way, they had to understand what is their position within the new environment in relation to the SA. For example, we saw the formation of the motor retail industry ombud scheme. We saw the formation of the consumer goods services ombud scheme. And these were members of the SA. Now you have the federal scheme, which was in the process of being formed. So, and you also have the franchise scheme, which is also in the pipeline. So now you have industries that started to look at themselves and see if they still need to use the SA or not. And now you talk about the issue of funding. Those industries have to contend with the issue of, if we form our own ombud scheme, do we still fund the ASA? So it's where now you look at the financial dynamics that affect the ASA. In consequence thereof, there were industries that were unhappy of being regulated by the ASA. Then they had to take us to court. And our budget was so small. Then we had to defend those matters in the High Court. We had to engage the services of senior counsels and junior counsels and law firms, and our finances were drained. And I think that the idea was to push us to the brink to where we'll end up collapsing. But I think what the board did and the remainder of our members took a decision that in order to avoid the litigious matters, because they were coming thick and fast, they had to put the ASA under business school. By so doing, we will strategically avoid the litigation matters, whilst on the other hand, we are regrouping, talking to our funders, emphasizing the importance of self-regulation in South Africa. And I think the process of business in terms of the Companies Act allowed us that space for the past 4 years to really find a space to deal with our internal issues without us being involved in high court matters on a daily basis. But then I think in terms of the business process, we have a new board, we have a new acting CEO, and we are gaining momentum. And I think in 2 to 3 years' time, we should be up and running and be stronger than before, because the advertising agencies, the marketers, as well as the media owners will have been able to understand what the ASA is. I think one of the major challenges that we face is that the generalization of managers within the advertising industry led them to believe that they don't actually own the ASA. And I think that we are in that process. We are conscientizing them that, in fact, advertising agencies and marketers and media owners own the ASA. ASA doesn't own them. So when we engage with our people, we realize that they are of the view that we own them. And that was a big challenge for us. So now we need to turn the mindset around and make them understand that they actually own the ASA.
You still there? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I thought we broke up. No, I mean, yeah, it sounds like you must have quite a lot of gray hairs, or going through quite an expense of a lot of hair dye to cover up those gray hairs from all these years of stress and difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, yesterday I just cut my hair short because I think that my hair is turning gray due to the process that we went through. But I think we need to engage more with government, because I think with their backing, we can do better.
No, I definitely agree, and that's what I've found in my own research. That it's quite a process where engaging with government isn't so simple as one is led to believe, through movies or Western movies, like American movies and such things. And it is a process because you're working with people and there's different vested interests, and it can be a struggle, and we wish it would be over within a short time, but unfortunately it can take many, many years. And that is hard on any person. And I think also what's unique is that our legislation is very different to American legislation. South Africa is similar to European law, where it works on principles, and that's where you mentioned in the beginning how you wanted to protect the persons, the consumers, and that falls around a social accounting, and that's what South Africa embodies more, that social accounting aspect. So I mean, let's segue on to one of the groundbreaking rulings that was put in place, and that was one done by Carl Muller with Nokia back in 2004, where it was, as I understand from your previous colleague Leon, that it was a very detailed and lengthy process where Carl was going through the whole process and explaining the help and development of that new clause within the ASA. And in summary, it's that cellular devices aren't to be advertised to children under the age of 16 for non-essential purposes.
Yes.
So I was hoping if you just give some of your experience or background through that whole process and enlighten us how that all formed out.
Yeah, I wasn't here in 2004, but I do know that is the era wherein cell phones in South Africa was getting momentum. And at that time, I think Vodacom was only competing with MTN. Now, it was launching this campaign where it showed that it's the most favorable network provider in South Africa compared to MTN. I think it undertook a study among the youth. And they meant that one of the issues is that around 2004, it's when we actually started to having a growing middle class, black middle class, who could take their kids to previously white schools. And as such, a cell phone was seen as a luxury. Now it was more encouraging young children, include both black and white, to have access to cell phone to look cool. But Kamula, I think, was concerned about the remedial effect and lodged a complaint with us. And I think at that time, it was a taboo to talk about radiation effect of using the cell phones. The only thing that was promoted was what seems to be the advantage of the cell phone. And I think Carl came at the right time, wherein that issue had to be brought up into the public. And they say, as an entity that is meant to protect consumers, was invited to consider that complaint, that in fact this campaign is prejudicial to our society, in that encouraging young children to use cell phones could result in harm. But then what Vodacom did in the first instance was to argue that all what it did was to encourage, it was in conscience of the study that it conducted, that in fact amongst the youth is the best and network provider. But the fact of the matter remains is that the first ruling that was issued by the ASA was that cell phones must not be marketed or advertised to young children, and cell phone must be used only for its essential purpose. And I think the intention thereof was to limit children from accessing cell phones for fun. The whole idea was that children must access the cell phone only if it's essential. By so doing, it will limit the risk of radiation exposure. I think that was groundbreaking.
Yeah, no, it was very like a giant leap, and because it also took on precedent from the UK regulatory body. And I also heard that Carl Muller, one of the concluding statements he made that sort of put the cherry on the top that tipped over the review panel was he strongly stipulated and showed supporting evidence that he would rather see a cigarette in a child's hand than a cell phone to their head, in terms of the biological damage that can occur and such like. So
yeah.
And what was unique with him is that he was a physics lecturer. He had a lot of understanding, and he was a very persistent and forward man, and trying to find the ways forward. And also, what's interesting is that keyword essential purpose and how it stayed strong through its original setting and even to today. Because from my looking at forums or other places, people would argue an essential service, to watch my latest Netflix show on my phone is an essential, service, product, or to, connect on Facebook with my friends is essential. But in reality, it's not essential, because a person can do this.
No, it's not.
Through a connected.
No, it's not.
and also
because I think that is an area that we need to engage on. And I think with social media, I think it's essential. Yes, it may be to communicate important messages, but now we see a trend where cell phones or iPads or whatever are used for study. In fact, schools, I know in Gauteng, the Department of Education in Gauteng has tried by all means to move from books and from manual teaching to internet-based teaching, and encourages learners to own laptops and iPads and iPhones. And I think, I don't know whether have we done a research on what could be the consequences of that. So I think that its essential use has actually evolved.
Yeah, I mean,
But I think that it's something that we can engage on soon.
Yeah, I mean yes, that's happening already at the moment globally, especially with the latest 5G planning epidemic of rollout. There's been a lot more vocalization of the potential inherent risks, but also what's very difficult is a couple of things. One of them is that the words or terminology or literature is very discriminatory on the different usage of radiation. So, what radiation is called as non-native electromagnetic fields encompasses both visible light, so that's the blue light that comes off the device, along with the magnetic field and the radio frequency field. And what the studies have shown, I mean, we had some previous guests on the show, neurosurgeons and neurologists, and they went into quite detail explaining the physiology of how the effects the radiation, the different types, or all of them together, have on the body and the brain is, in fact, child abuse. And it's the equivalent of what happens underneath the skin in the cell structure. What the one quote was, taking your child into the middle of a shopping center and beating the crap out of it in front of everyone. And that's because how it affects, so that's what it happens underneath the skin. And that's how it affects the mental development of the brain and of the child to be able to form things, because take into account the blue light. So what we found with the research, and this is with Nobel Prizes now have come out, is that the non-native EMF is the leading non-linear contributor to obesity, diabetes, and other mitochondrial diseases in the world. And I know it sounds crazy, but the science shows that effect. And what the radiation does, particularly like in the blue light, is that it lowers the dopamine levels in the brain. And what that does is that it actually results in an increase in opiate addiction, hence people wanting to use a device more, and removes their ability to think laterally, which means they are inhibited from connecting the dots, and they can only focus on one thing at a time, making it very, very difficult. So, and that's why the latest ICD Code 11 from the World Health Organization has, created a classification for gaming addiction, and that relates to the whole light and the radiation effect because of what it has on the brain, and particularly also thyroid issues. So, because that blue light, how it has actually able to penetrate the skin a couple of centimeters. This happens a lot with women in most cases where they're holding the device close to them and they have a light emitting to their thyroid, and that blue light actually inhibits and sort of damages the functionability of the thyroid. And then they have this thing called Hashimoto's disease. So that's part of the reason why these women are getting bigger and fatter. And no matter how, and men as well, no matter how much they try to exercise or diet plan, I mean, you've seen there's diet books, diet pills, all these things advertised on it, and nothing's working. And, we're using Einstein's equation of E equals mc squared to explain to us how it's not about diet and exercise. It's the opposite. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting development. I mean, even with the Gauteng department, trying to push out these devices. And part of it also comes to conflict of interest, or what happens is the person's doing the initial research for Regulators South Africa, or the department, are not aware of their conflict of interest. So one of the stories is from the CSIR and the iPad rollout into schools with the e-health agenda as part of what you're mentioning. And, during my thesis, we had a representative for that program come and give us a lecture on ethics approval, on what is ethics during research. And it was quite interesting because the irony of it is that, I asked her, she stipulated in the beginning that her salary is mandated by putting iPads into the schools. And her bonus from a director is dictated by the more iPads she puts into the schools, the greater her bonus. So, sorry?
I'm saying, I think that is my concern as well, that one, you have the manufacturers of these items who have the distribution channels, right?
Yes, correct.
And now you have health concerns that are not being pushed. Because if you don't have activists who bring these issues up, you and I are learned individuals. And the majority of educators don't have access to this information. And I think there needs to be a balance where parents and educators are aware of the product that they consume on a daily basis. Because as parents, as well at home, we are often bullied by our own kids to buy them cell phones and these items. Because if we don't do that, some they threaten suicide, some they threaten running away, some they threaten us with words like they are bullied out there and all the stuff. I think this is one issue that is massive in nature. And I think that we need to engage in all fronts. Because you have what we call the technology age, which is growing rapidly. And it comes with its own risks. But I did my research as well this morning in preparation for this show, that there are companies now that come up with radiation protection devices. I don't know whether they are useful or not, and whether the effects thereof are real or not, and whether these devices are generally supported.
Yeah, in terms of those kind of devices, I will come to that. And one of the keywords you mentioned earlier was the word nature. And if we come back to nature, because the most important thing to actually combating these negative effects from the radiation is being back in touch with nature. So, if you probably remember, Faye, when you were a child or younger, you weren't indoors. You were outside most of the time. Out in the sun, you'll be barefoot on the ground and you'll be connected with nature. And that process, from a physiological point of view, raises your dopamine levels. And then you're able to think more, you're able to criticize, you're able to analyze, you're able to take action. Where now this thing of being indoors 90% or 99% of the time, and this whole thing with blue light, because Google owns the patent from 1980 in the 1980s on this specific design. So all devices come out with this light effect. And again, the combination with that and the radiation lowers the dopamine levels and again triggers this opiate addiction in the brain. And that's part of the reason, like you said, children are addicted to it, where they go shouting and threatening their parents saying, you will give it to me or else, because I have to have it. And, one of the interesting things is, even with heroin addicts, the actual best solution for them to help them get off their addiction is to put them in the sun, because that reconnection with nature actually restabilizes the signals, the timing, and the chemistry in the brain. In terms of these devices that, the people sell to attach to them, yes, there are some that make a small difference, some a bigger difference. There are some that, really lose the plot and actually are not going to make any difference at all. And that's stuff I cover in my research and consultation. And, I'm having more and more doctors now contact me to help them with their patients. Recently, I was contacted by the South African military, and they want to use my research to help redesign the soldier training program and the medical health services, because this pandemic is affecting them and decreasing. They want to find ways to increase soldiers' biological performance, not have it decrease. So these different mitigation options can help. And it's even like some of you get these like stick-on devices for cell phones. Saying, oh, it will make it safer, and people think they can use it more. And I had one of the companies, actually two of them locally, try to contact me to give them input. And I said, you cannot use these words that you want to use to promote the device. One, it's not going to deliver what you're claiming. Two, you're actually going to create the person to have more of a risk and concern based on these other studies. And three, you can't do it because you can't include children because of the ASA ruling. And they're just going, I don't care. I spent money, I invested, this is going to be a thing. Because remember, they themselves are addicted to, they want to have their device. They want to have an excuse of, oh, I have some protection. But in reality, most of these techs don't have much of an impact. In terms of, like you can have a blue light filter on the phone, and that will, the sticker, the shield sticker on top of the phone, that would have a much better impact than other tech. If you're using your device and you're out in the sun and you're having sun exposure on you, like midday sun or the different parts, that will have a much better effect and actually counter the effects greatly than having those little devices. But if you're going to use the device at nighttime before going to bed or have that blue light on you, that kills something called DHA and melatonin in your brain. Now, these are very important hormones that actually enable you to sleep and have your body go into regenerative state. So what happens is, like, for example, persons who get fatter and fatter, it's not because this whole diet thing is, when it comes down to physics, we look at atoms, electrons, protons. And what happens is that this radiation has the ability to break what's called a covalent bond, which means that your dance pair, husband and wife of electrons and protons, they are having a separation or divorce. The relationship is being attacked. And the electron dissipates and you have an excess of protons. And that excess of protons leads to swelling. And that's why people get fatter and fatter, because the body tries to get bigger to try to retain more electrons, but it keeps losing. And because of this cycle, that's why we call it a non-linear effect, is that a small change causes this massive repercussion. And that's why I said earlier is that the radiation is found, the non-native EMF is found to be the leading non-linear contributor to obesity, diabetes, and other mitochondrial-related diseases. So there's even this whole thing of, diabetes is now the second leading cause of death in South Africa. And everyone thinks it's about the carbohydrates and sugars. And, it's not the first issue. It's a later part. But this exposure to radiation drives that craving for the sugar, or actually the electrons in it, because of the change in chemistry in the brain. So that's, part of that aspect. So linking also earlier to this whole, I was mentioning about the CSIR, and, again, people aren't always aware of their own addiction or conflict of interest, because, the guest lecturer, she said, guys, I asked, did you look at the user manual and the warning labels for the devices? And she said, no, she didn't. And I said, did anyone ask you to do it? Because this is an ethics lecture. And she said, no one brought it up. And she said, it would be interesting to actually see if this type of thing is done. And you could write a paper on it. But a key thing afterwards, near the end, she also said, while she was, looking at her social media on her phone during her own lecture, she said, if she had a choice between having better cell phone reception or cancer, she would take the cancer. So, it's her own environment and being affected by it created this unknowing conflict of interest, in addition to what her job and mandate was doing. But, also, like, going on to, again, with the diabetes, we made before, there was the whole thing of weighted studies where, industry would then put together, reviewers and fund certain studies. as a means to try lobby or sway government about the inherent risks of certain things. So, I mean, one of them with the sugar, you're correcting me on clarifying of how, you know, it's studies funded by industry came across your table, and it also resulted in you reviewing a ruling. I was hoping you could tell us more about that.
The review.
We're talking about Coca-Cola or funded studies or sugar.
Yeah, I think the issue there is one, in terms of some information that I happen to get, is that one, you find that advertisers, especially big corporates, they tend to find studies. And I think for me, it's a concern in that one, if you are a big corporate and there are concerns about your product, let's say, for example, Coca-Cola, we do know that there are concerns about health risks, about acidity and all the stuff. And there are campaigns where we see worldwide where they come up with new products like Coca-Cola Zero, Coca-Cola Light, because the companies are accused of formulating drinks that are unhealthy. And if you find an entity like that, where there are issues in terms of their formulations, but then they come and say, but there are institutions that have actually proven, like for instance, sugar is good for your health. And we would find that that study is actually funded or sponsored by that entity. I think that I will agree with you that there is a conflict of interest, because you find a study that actually supports your products, but in effect, when you might be aware that there are issues with your product. Let's say, for instance, there are instances even within the medical fraternity where you have companies that manufacture products that haven't been clinically tested, but you have experts who endorse those products. I mean, we have seen it in terms of some of the complaints that have come through, where the product hasn't been clinically proven, but you have an expert, a professor who went through studies and wrote articles on some of the things, but comes and says, this product can make you lose weight. And I think it touches on the issue of ethics that you mentioned earlier on, that we need to look at ethical principles within the advertising industry. I do know that one association within the medical fraternity is having a code. In fact, they amended their code in an attempt to include ethics as part of the standards. But the problem comes in on the measurement, whether what you think is ethical, is it unethical to somebody based on what? So my concern, I think your concern as well, and should be everybody's concern, is the weighted studies that come through, which in their data are compromised. And I think the question that comes to my mind now is, how do you challenge those? Because either you need to do same tests and come up with a report, and also the issue of funds, because you know, conducting a widespread research requires funding. And that is why some of these studies that come forth, they come from what one could call established institutions, you see. And I think it's frustrating because if you have a section within a university that specializes in a certain field, then let's say, for instance, in the field of nutrition, and it comes out and says, in terms of our research, we have discovered that having X amount of sugar to boost your immune system, when in real fact, you know that that amount of sugar in 5 years' time, it will kill somebody. But because you are funded, you have to undertake the study. And I think that's the challenge that as the ASA, and in terms of the code, we are compelled to accept research institutions that seems to be independent of the advertiser report and say the claims made in the advert are substantiated as confirmed in the report by whoever. And one of the challenges that we are facing is that the complainant is not required to support their complaints with scientific evidence. Once that happens, then either we have to refer the matter to an arbitrator and say, this is more scientific in nature. And as they say, we don't have the necessary expertise to handle that. We don't have the capacity to handle conflicting scientific reports. And I think it's one of the issues that the advertising industry should engage on. And one of the issues that comes to my mind as I speak to you now is, how do you get to reject a report that comes from what one could call a credible institute, not knowing who the funder is, because we don't usually ask who the funder or who the sponsor of the research is. It only comes after fact. But the research that we have approved and accepted as substantiation for a certain claim is funded by whoever. At times, this information comes after 5 years.
It is very difficult because, since we are talking about advertising and marketing, one of the other strategies of industry or lobbyists is that they would artificially create what is known as a credible institute. So it's not only a thing of funding scientists, they would then call it, say, the International Association of Research, etc. And by using this big name and making it sound bigger, and then what they do is they would hold conferences, they would choose selective scientists to be on a review panel, and they would invite all these things and create more of a media advertising campaign so that they become number one on Google. And so they try to create this artificial metric system that scientists must try and employ in order to hopefully get funded or utilize it. And what happens is with these review bodies or within those organizations, again, just by using this big fancy word and this fancy logo, the public gets the perception of, oh, this must be credible. Oh, they funded the politician to come to the group and listen to it. And it's very difficult because, it takes a very strong skill set to read their papers or read their specific wording. Like they'll use very specific words to sort of legally disclaim certain things. But also other people don't use it, and you have this broken telephone effect where then advertisers would take the original manuscript from the organization after legal court stuff, and they would change certain words in their company adverts saying, oh, look, the International Association of what you would call it, stated that this is perfectly safe. Meanwhile,
Yes.
there's a whole paragraph that needs to be inserted into that statement. And it's I mean, that's why people are having to approach the court. And that's also part of why my thesis had this principle called the public interest override, where you have to demonstrate, as you said, that could take a few years. Is there contravention in the law? If it's small or big, it doesn't matter. Is it this conflict of interest or all these other aspects? And what, like you described, as what the work you do is, you working in the public's interest. And even though the industry is a public member, but it's about identifying these conflicts of interest and saying, if you are going to do things in a certain way, then you need to do certain changes to comply with the law and the safety of things. But it can be difficult because, like, even with my personal experience, I got to lodge a complaint with the ASA. Unfortunately, it was at a time where you were having that restructuring process. And what I found was, when I lodged the complaint, is that the words I wrote and what they were reviewed by the administrative person handling my complaint were changed, or parts of it weren't included. So then I had to appeal the initial ruling, because I said the core of my complaint was not addressed. And then when it came to the presentation meeting, because I'm in Cape Town, you are in Johannesburg, and I did not have the financial means to personally come to Johannesburg. And your previous premises, you had a proper infrastructure where you had microphones for each speaker, you had a video camera, you had a TV monitor, etc. However, because this was deferred during transition period to a different party, all they had was a laptop with a very poor Wi-Fi connection. So during the arbitration meeting of discussion, the opposing party had their attorney there, and she was able to speak, and I could not hear what was said or discussed. And vice versa, they couldn't hear what I said or discussed. And part of the key thing during the discussion was that the defendant was stating that the mobile device in access to the program that I was complaining about could not be accessed unless a parent specifically gave permission for that child to access the program, of which I said was a lie, because when I tested the program, that a child could access it freely and actually was encouraged to use it more freely and expose themselves. However, by not being there personally, I was not able to advocate and demonstrate this to be contrary to what the statement was of the defendant. So, from my experience, I mean, as you said, it's going to take 2 years or more for the ASA to get the strongest and best it ever has. But it's important for persons that want to assist the ASA and the public to carry on lodging these complaints, and it is in their best interest if they are in Gauteng, from my experience, so they can be there in person to discuss or debate the process during the arbitration of the matter. So, I mean, I don't know if you have any comments on that.
I think we just need to work, because we have moved now, and I think that where we are, it's even worse. I think what we need to do is to, once we are up and running, then we need to have proper infrastructure, so that no party will be prejudiced. And I think that will be based on what we have in the kitty.
Because that would be similar to, for example, the equality court or administrative court procedures, is that you could have a person complaining from, the far farms of the Free State, and they might not have the financial means and they'll be prejudiced against if they're, having to travel from there all the way to your facilities in Joburg. So, like you said, it's good that you have it aware of how to set up this infrastructure. And thankfully, the cost of setting up such infrastructure today is much more affordable than a decade ago. So that is the good news with the advancements of technology. So what we've got summary from this discussion is that technology is good, but it needs to be regulated and controlled of how it can be used in the best interest, and not abused and causing this abusive effect on the body and our loved ones, because it's going to impact on the economy. As my consultation with medical professionals, persons are paying more and more money on medication, and it's costing more to the state in trying to treat these issues than the benefit of the marketing aspect. One thing
Yeah.
you mentioned before was that you were in the process of wanting to be integrated or as part of the Consumer Protection Act as a regulatory body. How has that process been going along?
The new board abandoned the process of applying for accreditation. So they abandoned it.
Do you think
so we will no longer, I think for now we will not be considering it, but I still think that is a good idea that we are accredited in terms of the CPA.
Especially also by in the long run, in a few years' time, if you do decide to reintegrate to be an authoritative body with it, as my understanding is that a lot of your rulings would come into effect as part of the Consumer Protection Act, because like you said, you've been developing, carrying on the reins of the legislative development of the clauses. And, when I look at the work, it's really powerful how a keen mind has really been applied to the development of these clauses within the ASA, and it seems that there will be a much better metric with the case precedents on helping evolve the Consumer Protection Act a lot better for the public.
Yes.
So for those for our listeners out there, part of the thing is that with the ASA is that you are a reactive body, meaning that even if you see a billboard where an advert is violating the clauses of the ASA, you as the ASA aren't allowed to go and interfere straight away. You require a member of the public to lodge a complaint before action can take place.
Yes, we are a reactive entity.
So I was hoping you can give guidance to our listeners out there on what are the steps that they should follow, and in terms of making themselves more aware of the ASA rulings and lodging these complaints.
Okay, I think what we expect, because bear in mind that one of the issues is that we are not a censorship entity where we go around and say you cannot advertise that. So the position that we come from is that people must be offended or must have realized that this advert is in contravention of the code. It's not for us, because we might be of the view that a certain ad contravenes the code, but only find that with the response that we get from the advertiser is not. So hence at times we dismiss or we uphold the complaint. So if members of the public see an ad that they believe is either misleading or offensive or affect children or in any manner or unsubstantiated claims, then they can contact the ASA. Either they can email, because we expect the complaints to be in writing. Either they can email to complaint, COMPAPLAINT, @asasa.org.za, or they can email again to info@asasa.org.za, because now we are in the era of no using faxes, so I cannot say please fax. So either you can use the email, or you can go to our website www.asasa.org.za to go through our codes to look at the procedure to be followed. So we expect the complaint to be in writing, and the complainant must disclose their full names and their identity document or the passport number, the address, if possible, where they work from, and the numbers that we can contact them on. But it is important to indicate that we don't usually disclose contact details of the complainant to the advertiser, because we are aware that some advertisers tend to threaten complainants, or they induce them to withdraw the complaints, or they offer them rewards in order to compel them to withdraw the complaints. We will only forward the complainant's contact details to the advertiser in the event the advertiser is willing to settle with the complaint, and we will also get a consent from the complainant whether they want their contact details to be forwarded to the advertiser for settlement purposes only. So I think that's the procedure that people out there have to follow in order to complain to us. Once we get the complaint, then we forward it to the advertiser for a response, and we give them some days within which to respond. For consumer matters, it's 5 days. For competitor matters, it's 3 days. For competitors, it's 3 days because the code compels them to have substantiation in place or evidence in place at the time that they advertise. So we don't expect them to go and fabricate evidence and all that stuff. Once we get the response, then we decide whether the advertising is in contravention of the code or not. Then that we're going to issue a ruling.
And we will be sure to have those details in the show notes of this show. You've been very generous with your time. Is there any other closing comments or advice you would like to give our listeners?
I think what we need is to have educated consumers, 1. 2, active consumers, because you can be educated but not be active. Not vigilant as such, but be active, be aware of commercials and marketing materials that are thrown your way, and see if you have a role to play within the society, because educated and active consumers also have a responsibility to protect vulnerable consumers like the elderly, the illiterate ones, as well as children. So I think that it is important for every member of society, where they have the necessary skills and expertise and knowledge, to help in protecting our vulnerable citizens.
No, I mean that's what the sort of the ethos of this show, of SuperDads. Because are you a father yet, Fred?
Yes, I'm a father.
How many children do you have so far?
I have 8, and we are expecting the 9th.
Wow! Congratulations. That's a real blessing.
Yes.
So what I want to do, because part of the show is that the reason, based on everything you've told us, the reason why you qualified being called a super dad or title is that it is a person that goes out of their way to protect themselves and their children and their family and an environment by being an example of change, by leading what others should follow. And what you've been telling us today and describing, you definitely embody that ethos of being a super dad, because like I said, you're a very warm, approachable person. You're very fair, and you go out of your way to try to protect yourself, your children, and the public as best as you can through your mandate and role in the ASA, as well as being a very nice and warm person, which means that you're able to demonstrate to people how one can be civil in trying to find a better way for all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being on the show. Remember, everyone, that you can still subscribe to the show, and we're going to be covering more stuff relating to this. And feel free to contact the ASA, and the details will be in the show notes.
For more, visit www.nicheradio.co.za.